Council as American President Joe Biden accuses Russia Putin of war crimes. And over to the African continent, Dangote says it will complete its Nigerian oil refinery in the fourth quarter. Who predicted further worse instances of mass killing of civilians by Ukrainian troops would be discovered. Now, the Security Council session is to consider Ukrainians' allegations of the murder of civilians by Russian soldiers in Balta, northwest of Kiev, following the bodies of hundreds of bodies, some bound and shot of the drain. Now, Vladimir Zelensky, on a visit to the town of Balta, says the atrocities carried out in the region constituted genocide by the Russian troops, and added it was becoming increasingly harder for Ukraine to negotiate with water, particularly.
Чем дольше будет Российская Федерация затягивать процесс встречи, тем хуже для них, и в принципе для этой ситуации, для этой войны, потому что с каждым днем, когда заходят наши войска и деоккупируют те или иные территории, вы видите, что происходит. Очень сложно разговаривать, когда ты видишь то, что они тут натворили. И ежедневно, понимаете, там находятся люди в бочках, в погребах и так далее, задушенные и просто замученные. Поэтому считаю, что им нужно, якщо є чим думати, то думати швидше. Це військові злочини, і це буде визнано світом як геноцид. Те, що ви сьогодні тут знаходитесь і бачите, що відбулося. Ми знаємо тисячі людей вбитих і закатованих з відрубаними кінцівками, зґвалтовані жінки, вбиті діти. Я думаю, що це більше, ніж це є геноцид.
Truss's visit comes as the world reacts images from Balta, showing the bodies of civilians lying on the ground in makeshift graves after the town north of Ukraine has been taken from Russian troops. Now, British Foreign Secretary Liz Truss and Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba give a joint news conference at the British Embassy in Warsaw, Poland.
It's good to have the opportunity to hear from my friend and colleague Dmytro Kuleba, the Ukrainian Foreign Minister, at what is an extremely difficult time. What we have seen on the streets of Irpin and Bucha are scenes that we will never forget. We have seen butchery, evidence of rape and sexual violence, as well as the indiscriminate killing of civilians. We will ensure that the perpetrators are brought to justice for these barbaric crimes. And together with our allies, we will step up our efforts to stop Putin's appalling war. 3 weeks ago, the UK led 41 states to refer these atrocities to the International Criminal Court. We're providing additional funding to the ICC. The UK military and police are providing technical assistance to the investigations, and the Metropolitan Police War Crimes Unit have commenced the collection of evidence. We're working very closely with the Ukrainian government on this. We've appointed former ICC judge Sir Howard Morrison as an independent advisor to the Ukrainian Prosecutor General. And today I can announce that we're launching a £10 million civil society fund to support organisations in Ukraine, including those helping the victims of conflict-related sexual violence. We will not rest until these criminals have been brought to justice. We are clear that after these appalling crimes, Russia has no place on the Human Rights Council. And it is the responsibility of the UK and our allies, and that's what Dmytro and I have discussed today, to step up our support for our brave Ukrainian friends. That means more weapons and more sanctions. Putin must lose in Ukraine. Later this week, the G7 foreign ministers and the NATO foreign ministers will meet. We need to announce a tough new wave of sanctions. The reality is that money is still flowing from the West into Putin's war machine, and that has to stop. In Brussels, I will be working with our partners to go further, as has been advocated by Dmytro, in banning Russian ships from our ports, in cracking down on Russian banks, in going after new industries filling Putin's war chest, like gold, and agreeing a clear timetable to eliminate our imports of Russian oil, gas and coal. We also need even more weapons of the type the Ukrainians are asking for. The UK is supplying more, including next-generation light anti-tank weapons, Javelin missiles and Starstreak anti-aircraft systems. And last week, we hosted a donor conference with our allies to secure more. The fact is that being tough is the only approach that will work. Putin has escalated this war, and this approach is vital to ensuring he loses in Ukraine and that we see a full withdrawal of Russian troops and Ukraine's hand is strengthened at the negotiating table. There should be no talk of removing sanctions while Putin's troops are in Ukraine and the threat of Russian aggression looms over Europe. We need to see Putin withdraw his troops. We need to see Ukraine's full territorial integrity restored. We need to see Russians' ability for further aggression stopped. We need a plan to rebuild Ukraine, and we need justice done at the International Criminal Court. Dmytro, we salute your bravery and the bravery of the Ukrainian people. We are determined to help in whatever way we can. We will back you unwaveringly in your negotiations, and together we will not rest until Putin fails and Ukraine prevails.
He says the atrocities are just the tip of the iceberg. We take a listen.
The battle for Kiev, but the war goes on. We are preparing for the new large-scale offensive by Russia in eastern Ukraine. They will try to capture more territories in Donetsk and Lugansk regions. They will try to entrench and root themselves in the Kherson region. They will try to capture bleeding Mariupol. What you've seen, the horrors that we've seen in Bucha are just a tip of the iceberg of all the crimes that have been committed by Russian army in the territory of Ukraine so far. And I can tell you without an exaggeration, but with great sorrow, that the situation in Mariupol is much worse compared to what we've seen in Bucha and other cities, towns and villages nearby Kiev. Horrors of Bucha, Mariupol and other places demand serious G7 and EU sanctions. I appreciate everything that has been done so far, but Liz is right. The West continues to fuel Russian war machine with payments for fossil fuels, with trade that is still taking place between Russia and Western countries, with financial transactions conducted through Russian banks that have not been disconnected from SWIFT yet. And when we discuss the sanctions that must be imposed on Russia without any delay, actually we have the same speaking points with Liz, and I appreciate that the fact that Ukraine and the United Kingdom are aligned on this issue too. Half measures are not enough anymore. I demand from our partners, on behalf of the victims of Bucha and the people of Ukraine, to take the most severe sanctions against Russia this week. This is not the request of Ukraine's foreign minister. This is the plea of the victims of rape, torture, and killings, their relatives, and the entire Ukrainian nation. I have heard thousands of arguments why this or that sanction cannot be imposed against Russia. It's time to put all hesitation, reluctance, business-wise arguments aside and think about human sufferings and the need to stop the Russian war machine until it kills and destroys more on its way. I invite foreign representatives, my colleagues, those who still have doubts whether to disconnect Russian banks from SWIFT or to continue buying Russian gas, oil, and coal, or to receive Russian vessels in ports and process products either sold to Russia or bought from Russia. I invite all of them to visit Bucha without any delay, to visit a small village and stand in front of the mass grave, to see the bodies of dead Ukrainian women who had been raped before being killed and whom the Russians tried to set on fire to hide the traces of their crimes. And I do this address to all foreign ministers who will be meeting this week at NATO, at the European Union, at the G7 ministerial. If you have doubts, reluctance, or arguments about the need to keep doing business with Russia, go to Bucha first, and then talk to me. The same goes for weapons. There have been some hesitations and reluctance to provide Ukraine with all weapons that we are asking for. The same approach should be applied to the issue of weapons. The more weapons we have, the sooner we will be able to win this war and to prevent Russia from committing more crimes. I appreciate the United Kingdom's readiness to work closely with Ukraine on the investigation of the committed war crimes and to bringing perpetrators and their commanders to account. International justice takes time, but we will be focused on making sure that they pay the price for what they have done to the people of Ukraine. After everything we've seen, I believe I would like to echo what Lee said and also demand the expulsion of Russia from the Human Rights Council. Ukraine has been raising this issue before. We now insist that this must be done immediately. Finally, I would like to say that 2 points. We discussed how Ukraine, United Kingdom, and Poland can further build up our relations in the trilateral format that we created shortly before the aggression. This last month demonstrated that Poland, Ukraine, and the United Kingdom are the closest friends, and they can do a lot together. And I see that there is a political will in both London and Warsaw to do more. And finally, I would like to thank Liz and the entire UK government and the people of the United Kingdom to everything that you have done so far and your resolve not to stop until Ukraine wins and justice prevails. Because the victory of Ukraine will be the victory of justice in Europe and in the world. Thank you.
And over in the US National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan says the images and information out of Belfast shows further evidence that Russia has committed new crimes and adds that the White House plans to announce new sanctions. Now, he also explains why President Joe Biden hasn't characterized Ukraine's war as a genocide amid brutal assault on civilians. Now, Sullivan speaks at the press briefing.
Tragic, they're shocking, but unfortunately, they're not surprising. We released information even before Russia's invasion, showing that Russia would engage in acts of brutality against civilians, including targeted killings of dissidents and others they deemed a threat to their occupation. And as the horrific images that have emerged from Bucha have shown, that's exactly what they have done. We had already concluded that Russia committed war crimes in Ukraine, and the information from Bucha appears to show further evidence of war crimes. And as the President said, we will work with the world to ensure there is full accountability for these crimes. We are also working intensively with our European allies on further sanctions to raise the pressure and raise the cost on Putin and on Russia. So this is something we, of course, continue to monitor every day. Based on what we have seen so far, we have seen atrocities, we have seen war crimes, we have not yet seen a level of systematic deprivation of life of the Ukrainian people to rise to the level of genocide. But again, that's something we will continue to monitor. There is not a mechanical formula for this. There is a process that we have run just recently at the State Department to ultimately determine that the mass killing of Rohingya in Burma constituted genocide. That was a lengthy process based on an amassing of evidence over a considerable period of time and involving, frankly, mass death, the mass incarceration of a significant portion of the Rohingya population. And we will look to a series of indicators along those lines to ultimately make a determination in Ukraine. But as the President said today, we have not arrived at that conclusion yet. I don't want to get into the specific intelligence related to Bucha at this point, but what I will say, as I said at the outset, is even before the invasion happened, we shared information with the public, with the press, including from this podium, that Russia was intending, as a matter of policy, not as a matter of one guy in a unit in a suburb of Kyiv, but as a matter of policy in this war, to kill dissidents, to kill those who caused problems for the occupation, and to impose a reign of terror across occupied territories within Ukraine. That is what we are seeing play out. So no, we do not believe that this is just a random accident or the rogue act of a particular individual. We believe that this was part of the plan. We declared it from this podium as part of the plan, and now we are seeing it play out in real life in living color in these terrible, tragic images we are seeing come from Bucha. You can expect further sanctions announcements this week, and we are coordinating with our allies and partners on what the exact parameters of that will be. But yes, this week we will have additional economic pressure elements to announce.
Canada says it will impose sanctions on 9 Russian and 9 Belarusian individuals for having facilitated and enabled Moscow's invasion of Ukraine. Now, Canadian Foreign Minister Mindy Jolie says in a statement that by enabling Russian President Vladimir Putin's senseless invasion of Ukraine, these close collaborators of the regime are complicit in the horrific events unfolding before their eyes. And over in Germany, Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock says Germany decides to declare undesirable a significant number of officials at the Russian embassy, adding that Berlin would also boost its support for Ukraine's armed forces. Germany's foreign ministry list is 104 accredited Russian diplomats in Germany. Still in Germany, Germany's Finance Minister Christian Lindner says the European Union must work towards cutting all economic ties with Russia over its criminal war in Ukraine, which casts doubt over an immediate embargo on Russian gas imports. Now, he says that all options were on the table, without an encompassing ban on Russian energy imports would inflict more economic damage on the EU member states than on Russia. Therefore, the EU must look separately at the possibility of banning oil, coal or gas, which can be replaced at varying speeds. To move over back to the US, where US President Joe Biden accuses Russian President Vladimir Putin of war crimes and calls for a trial, adding to the global outcry over civilian killings in the Ukrainian town of Balta, as more graphic images of the deaths emerge. The discovery of mass graves and tied bodies shows encroachments in Balta, outside Kiev, a town Ukrainian forces took claims from Russian troops, which set to galvanize the United States and Europe into imposing additional sanctions against Moscow. We take a listen to Biden.
You may remember I got criticized for calling Putin a war criminal. Well, the truth of the matter, you saw what happened to Bucha. This warrants him, he is a war criminal. But we have to gather the information. We have to continue to provide Ukraine with the weapons they need to continue the fight. And we have to gather all the detail so this can be have a war crime trial. This guy is brutal. And what's happening in Bucha is outrageous. And everyone's seen it. No, I think it is a war crime.
What are you going to do about it, sir? Are you going to do more sanctions on Russia?
I'm seeking more sanctions, yes. I'll have time to announce that to you.
Can you hold Putin accountable, though? You called him a war criminal.
He should be held accountable.
Without sanctions?
Well, no.
What else can you do?
No. Go the war crime tribunal. Yes, I'm going to continue to add sanctions. Thank you. I'll let you know.
However, the Kremlin categorically denies any accusations related to the murder of civilians, including in Balta, where it said the graves and corpses had been staged by Ukraine to challenge Russia. And over to the Russian side, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov says Western leaders should examine their own consequences before accusing Russia's President Vladimir Putin of war crimes. Now, he adds Moscow will hold a news conference later in the day to demonstrate that the Western accusation that its soldiers killed civilians in northern Ukraine were false. We take a listen.
Что завтра они сами запланировали рассмотрение ситуации на Украине во всех ее аспектах. Догадываюсь, что, зная британскую дипломатию, задача в том, чтобы растворить этот конкретный фейк в городе Буча в демагогических рассуждениях о природе украинского кризиса. Но мы все равно сегодня устами нашего постоянного представительства организуем в Нью-Йорке пресс-конференцию, где будут представлены подробнейшие материалы, которые показывают истинную природу событий, которые сейчас в городе Буча наши западные коллеги пытаются представить как свидетельство военных преступлений Российской Федерации. И мы будем настаивать на том, чтобы преступления, которые вооруженные силы Украины, ведомые националистическими, неонацистскими батальонами, совершили, также, конечно, не остались без последствий. Я говорил о том, что по итогам того раунда переговоров, который состоялся в Стамбуле 29 марта, мы увидели появление реализма в позиции украинской делегации. Реализма в отношении того, что касается путей обеспечения безопасности Украины. Уже понятно стало и киевским представителям о том, что гарантии безопасности невозможно получить в НАТО, и что о вступлении в НАТО следует забыть. Больше реализма о необходимости закрепить в договоре нейтральный статус Украины, и, конечно же, ее безъядерный статус, учитывая заигрывание с этой темой, которые звучали за последние несколько месяцев из уст украинских руководителей.
Meanwhile, US President Joe Biden accuses Putin of war crimes and calls for a trial, adding to the global outcry over civilian killings in the Ukrainian town of Balta is more graphic images of their death emerged. Now the Kremlin categorically denies any accusation related to the murder of civilians, including in Balta, but it said the graves and corpses had been spared by Ukraine to tarnish Russia. The still in Russia, the Russian United Nations Ambassador Vasily Nevedov holds a press conference to the United Nations to discuss the latest allegations against Russian President Vladimir Putin. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is accusing Russia for mass killing of civilians in Balta on Sunday and has called it genocide. In more reports still coming out from Russia, Russia's ex-president and deputy head of Security Council, Dmitry Medvedev, says Russia will respond proportionately to the expulsion of diplomats from a number of Western countries. And over to the UK, the British Prime Minister's spokesman says the British Prime Minister is keen to send new types of military aid to help Ukraine, adding that Kiev would have asked for help in defending against Russian ships. And London marine insurance market adds all of Russian waters to its list of areas deemed high risk. An advisory showed which is likely to raise the cost of shipping and add to the logistic pressures on Moscow. Now, guardians from the Joint War Committee, which comprises syndicate members from the Lloyd's Market Association, the NMA, and representatives from London's insurance company market, is worked closely on influences on the writers' consideration over the insurance payment. Following Russia's invasion of Ukraine on the 26th of February, the JWC last month added Ukraine and Russian waters around the Black Sea and around the Sea of Azov to its high-risk areas, as well as waters close to Romania and Turkey. We're still watching Global View on ABN. We took a quick break. When we return, we'll give you more developments and reports from the states. Welcome back and thank you for staying tuned. This is Global View ABN. Revealing more developments and reports from Europe. We start off with the UK, as the British Prime Minister's spokesman says the British Prime Minister has not yet received a police fine relating to breaches of public quarantine rules. The police have begun issuing fines after receiving evidence of an internal government investigation into lockdown parties in Johnson's Downing Street offices. Some events remain under investigation and other fines may be issued. Now over to France, with France's presidential race tightening ahead of Sunday's first round vote. Far-right President Emmanuel Macron and far-right challenger Marine Le Pen battle over pension reform. Now the opinion polls have long predicted Macron will win a second term, while Le Pen has tightened the gap, with polls showing the 44-year-old president with only a 6-point advantage to the likely runoff on April 24th. Now Le Pen has benefited from a campaign focused on purchasing power from which she is stepping down. So those are all the reports we have for you from Europe. We move over to the African continent and we start off with Nigeria, as the group executive of Dangote says Dangote's 650,000 barrels per day oil refinery being built in Nigeria is due to begin production by the fourth quarter of 2022. Now the refinery being built at the cost of $19 billion in Lagos has 4.74 billion liters storage capacity. He adds that 75% of the product would be moved by sea to Nigeria. Africa's richest man, Aliko Dangote, said in January he expected his oil refinery project to begin production by the end of the third quarter and reach full capacity by early 2023. And the project has been delayed by several years, and the cost has been cut to $19 billion from Dangote's earlier estimated $12 billion to $14 billion. Now, over in Rwanda, the utility regulator says over in Rwanda, the utility regulator says the price of petrol and diesel at the pump were increased in Rwanda amid instability in the global oil market caused by a rooted invasion of the king. Now, Rwanda has stabilized fuel pump prices since May 2021 by foregoing some taxes on petroleum products in a bid to dampen inflation. Now, the head of Rwanda Utility Regulatory Authority says the landlocked country hiked the price of petrol to 8.2% to 1,359 Rwandan prices, the equivalent of $1.32 per liter, and diesel to 13.9% to 1,368 Rwandan prices per liter for the next 2 months. Now, the war in Ukraine heightened supply concerns that were already underpinning prices around the world. Sanctions imposed on Russia and buyers, avoidance of Russian oil, have already led to a drop in prices and raised fears of larger losses. Still in Rwanda, a Rwandan appeal court upheld a 25-year jail sentence for Paul Rezunga, who was portrayed in the movie Hotel Rwanda, sheltering hundreds of people during the 1994 genocide, rejecting the bid extension of the life of people. We take a listen to the court ruling.
uburyo byamubera impamvu yo kugabanyirizwa igihano nta shingiro bifite rusanga ariko kuba ari ubwa mbere akurikiranyweho icyaha nk'uko n'urukiko rubanza rwabyemeje nta mpamvu urukiko rubona yatuma yongererwa igihano kuko igihano yahawe cy'igifungo cy'imyaka 25 kijyanye n'uburemere bw'icyaha yakoze.
Banga was convicted in September on 8 terrorism charges related to the activities of an organization opposed to President Paul Kagame, who is being held in Rwanda. He has denied all the charges and refused to take part in trial, which he and his supporters have denounced as a politically motivated charge. He was not in court in Kigali on Monday to hear the decision from the court, who said there was no reason to extend his sentence. We move over to South Africa, where President Cyril Ramaphosa said South Africa's national state of disaster in place for more than 2 years in response to COVID-19 will end in midnight local time on Monday. The national state of disaster has been the government's main mechanism for maintaining the pandemic. Removing it will do away with the vast majority of the remaining COVID-19 restrictions, aside from a few that will remain in place on a transitional basis. We take a listen to President Cyril Ramaphosa.
The requirement for a national state of disaster to be declared in terms of the Disaster Management Act are no longer met. Cabinet has decided to terminate the national state of disaster with effect from midnight tonight. The Disaster Management Act provides that certain elements of the regulations may remain in place for a limited period for post-disaster recovery and rehabilitation. Accordingly, certain transitional provisions will remain in place for a period of 30 days after the termination of the national state of disaster to ensure essential public health precautions and other necessary services are not interrupted while the new regulations in terms of the National Health Act come into effect. What this means is that all regulations and directions made in terms of the Disaster Management Act following the declaration of the national state of disaster in response to COVID-19 are repealed, meaning done away with effect from midnight tonight, with the exception of a few transitional measures. These transitional measures which will automatically lapse after 30 days, are the following. Firstly, we will still be required to wear a face mask in an indoor public space. This is necessary to prevent transmission in high-risk places, especially while many people remain unvaccinated. A mask is not required when outdoors. Secondly, the existing restrictions on gatherings will continue as a transitional measure. This means that both indoor and outdoor venues can take up to 50% of their capacity without any maximum limit, provided that proof of vaccination or a COVID test not older than 72 hours is required for entrance to the venue. Where there is no provision for proof of vaccination or a COVID test, then the current upper limit of 1,000 people indoors and 2,000 people outdoors will remain. Thirdly, the existing provisions with respect to international travel remain in place. This means that travelers entering South Africa will need to show proof of vaccination or a negative PCR test not older than 72 hours. If a traveler does not submit a vaccine certificate or proof of a negative COVID-19 test, they will be required to do an antigen test on arrival. If they test positive for COVID-19, they will need to isolate for 10 days. Fourthly, the directions that provide for the payment of the special 350 Rand Social Relief of Disaster Grant will remain in place. This will enable the Department of Social Development to finalize the regulations that will allow the payment of the grant to continue. Fifthly, directions that provide for the extension of the validity of a learner's license, driving license card, professional driving permit, and registration of a motor vehicle will remain in place. All other disaster regulations will fall away at midnight tonight. These include regulations on isolation of persons, on schools and access to old age homes, on public transport, on initiation practices, on cargo transportation, and on criminalization of non-adherence to these rules. The end of the national state of disaster also means that the coronavirus alert levels will no longer apply. There is one last measure that will outlive or remain and outlive the national state of disaster. This is the COVID-19 Vaccine Injury No-Fault Compensation Scheme. This scheme was brought into force in April last year to provide quick and easy access to compensation to any person who, after being vaccinated, suffers serious injury because of receiving a COVID-19 vaccine. The scheme will only be terminated once it has achieved its purpose.
South Africa, the continent's most industrialized economy and the worst hit in terms of reported infections and deaths, has been in an adjusted level 1 lockdown, or the lowest of the 5-tier system since October. Well, those are all the reports we have for you at this time in Global View. Join us at 6 p.m. for more developments and reports around the world in Blog Page. Watch us live on www.abn.ng/live or on StarTime channel 120. Follow us on Facebook at Global View. Thank you for watching. My name is Amma Travis. Good morning.